As Debbie mentioned, we're going to be hearing from John 4 today. However, we're going to be standing in a different place so we can view this story of the woman in the well in a different light. Jesus knew that the Pharisees had heard about him. So he left Judea, went back to Galilee. But on the way, he had to go through the country of Samaria, through a town called Sychar, which is near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there as well. Jesus was tired from his long trip, so he sat down beside the well. It was about 12 o'clock noon. It was then a Samaritan woman came to the well to get some water.
Maybe you heard my story. Maybe you heard it before. Maybe you know me. Lots of people know me. Well, that's what you think. People are so funny. We hear just a little bit about little bits and pieces about people. And then all of a sudden, we think we know the whole story. She's a Samaritan. She draws water at noon. She had 5 husbands. When people don't know the story, we fill in the gaps, right? We assume, we infer, we make the picture complete. She's a prostitute. She's an adulteress. She's a woman of ill repute. What if I'm not what you think at all? I am a Samaritan, and I did draw water at noon, and I have had 5 husbands. But only one of those was under my control. I was born a Samaritan, and women in my time didn't just marry one husband after another by choice. It was generally by law, the levirate law. When one brother died, the next took the woman as a wife, and so on, and so on, and so on. The only thing I did by my doing was to draw water at noon. Or maybe noon and God needed me to be at the well to meet a man. Maybe it's much more than you've ever thought it could have been. And besides all that, there is so much more to me. The thing you don't know, that you probably haven't heard, is that I am a religious leader. No, really, I am. I'm a leader at the synagogue. I study scriptures. I know traditions. I serve among the people. I'm not a woman of ill repute. I'm respected. I'm known. Yeah, I'm known. Think about that. For all these years, you've been led to believe I was an outcast, a sinner, condemned by my community, all because you heard just 3 simple things. But here I am, the same woman, holding the same three details, and yet something totally different. Can you even get your mind wrapped around that? Can you accept that you didn't know or see or understand me in truth? I am a religious leader. So now that we have that in order, let's return to the well.
Jesus said to this woman, "Please, give me a drink." The woman said, "I am surprised that you ask me for a drink, since you are a Jewish man and I am a Samaritan woman."
Some of the things you may have heard are true. Relationships between Jews and Samaritans were strained. They still are, actually. We are all sons and daughters of Jacob. We're cousins who worship the one true God. But along the way, things shifted. Our paths branched out, kind of like your Christian denomination. Even what's happening within United Methodism. As our faiths evolve and we focus on true values, and in elevating one thing over the other, we found ourselves, our lived faiths, to be quite different. And being prone to sin and separation, as humans are, we found judgment to lie just at our fingertips, much easier to grasp than tolerance, let alone acceptance, or understanding. And so we distance ourselves because of our differences. You go your way, I'll go mine. And as the distance grew, so did the judgments and the callousness and the hardness of the heart. We didn't associate with each other. So for Jesus to talk to me, a Samaritan, and him a Jew, something was different. Not to mention that he crossed the lines of estranged men speaking with women. This man was clearly a Jew, and yet he was not acting like one.
Jesus said, "If you only knew the free gift of God and who it is that is asking you for water, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said, "Sir, where will you get this living water? The well is very deep, and you have nothing to get water with. Are you greater than Jacob, our father, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, along with his sons and flocks?" Jesus answered, Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks from the water I give will never be thirsty. The water I give will become a spring of water gushing forth. Gushing up inside that person and giving eternal life. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so I will never be thirsty again, and will not have to come back here to get more water." Jesus told her, "Go get your husband and come back here." The woman answered, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right to say you have no husband. Really, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you live with now is not your husband. You told the truth."
All too often, people assume my questions were of ignorance, of longing only for acceptance and something different. But now that you know me, well, at least a little bit, or maybe a little differently, now that you know, I know the scriptures and the traditions that I led in a synagogue when I asked this man questions about the faith, about what he was proclaiming. What do you hear now? Do you hear my pleading for something from him? Or do you hear me testing him, evaluating him? Is this man a false prophet? Does he know that of which he speaks? Can he justify what he says, Jew or Samaritan? Listen, we cannot be careless with the faith, allowing whomever to say or teach whatever. We must be wise. We must be faithful. So I asked him questions, and he revealed to me something holy, something right, and something true. He showed me a powerful word from the Lord God, and I knew that he was a man worth listening to. Not just me, though, but others. The whole town. So I ran to the town to tell them, come, meet a man.
These are the words of God for the people of God.
About a year ago, I preached on this text as part of the I Am Statement series that we were doing. How many of you remember that sermon? Excellent. We're going to go in a whole different direction today. I heard it preached in 2004 when I was in Cuba, and it was one of the most compelling sermons that I've ever witnessed, and it sort of stuck with me. It's a text that I love that's rich. It goes far beyond what Tracy and Glenn shared today. There's some 40 verses, and we could go on and on and on. We could preach a whole series just on this story, sort of taking it one bit at a time. Now, after I preached last time, after service, as I was greeting folks, John Schultz comes up to me. Do you remember? And he says, "Have you ever heard the take that maybe she wasn't a sinner, but she was a religious leader? I heard it in this podcast that I listened to." And I said, "No, I've never heard that." So as this text came up for us as part of this series, I listened to the podcast, and they go into the story and sort of tell the details of it. And in that, they talk about the ways that maybe we could understand this woman as a religious leader. Now, if you've heard this text before, this storyline, that's probably novel for you, right? That's not how she's presented, but there's some good textual or historical evidence that sort of places that as a possibility, and we're going to go into it. Before we get there, I want to sort of lay that historical norm. So for those of us who go, I don't even know what you're talking about, this is the first time I've really heard this text, definitely not in this way, so tell me what we're talking about and what we're dealing with. So some of it you heard within the monologue itself, and some of it I want to go into. So here we are in John chapter 4. This is early in Jesus' ministry. He's already called the disciples, but he's an adult here. And they are making their way from the south up to the north, and the direct route is through the area of Samaria. Now, Israel, old Israel, is divided for the 12 tribes, the sons of Jacob. And each tribe, each son got their own region within Israel. It's all divided. So Judea becomes Judah. It sort of was two, then it becomes one. That's a whole other story. But so it's sort of clumped. So Samaria is one of those clumps, belongs to one of the tribes of Jacob. And as Tracy sort of illuminated as the woman at the well, they sort of broke off from the tradition of where other Jews were. And so they became basically a separate sect, and there became a significant rift between them. That rift continues today. And so you didn't associate. You wouldn't go as a Jew through that territory. The disciples knew that. They're like, no, we take the long way around. It doesn't matter if it's the shortest way or the fastest route. We're going to go the long way. And Jesus says, well, I'm not. So he heads into Samaria, and he, at noontime, is hot, he's tired, he sits at this well, as we've heard in this story. And the popular teaching is this woman comes at noon. That's what we hear in the scripture, and the assumption is it's hot at noon in the Middle East. You don't draw water in the heat of the day, you draw water in the cool of the morning or after dusk when it's cooling off a bit. That's when normal folks go to draw water. So this woman drawing water at noon is an anomaly. She's different somehow, which suggests to us something's wrong in the story, right? She's not doing what normal women do. She's doing this other thing. So there must be an otherness about her. And then we hear this very rich dialogue, most of which we forget. And we focus on the part where she had how many husbands? 5. Well, what kind of woman has 5 husbands? And we put all of our modern understandings onto her. Now, modern might have been from the 17th century, the 18th century, the 20th century. It could be any of those things. But most of the time, when you hear about this woman, she's a sinner. She may be a prostitute. At the very least, she's an adulteress, because what kind of woman has that many husbands? And so now we understand why she went to draw water at noon, because she would have been an outcast. She would have been sort of on the margins of her community. So to avoid all those people, to avoid the rumors and the gossip and the blah, 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 she comes at noon. Now, sort of the academics around textual criticisms and study have changed and evolved in more recent years. And so within the little last 50 years or so, there's been a bit more grace for this woman that say, hold on. Women in the first century just didn't marry and then divorce and then marry and divorce and marry and divorce. It was completely illegal. To have a divorce, you had to have a whole lot of reasoning. It generally had to be justified by the man. There was a whole lot to it. But then once you were divorced, you couldn't remarry, because that second relationship in and of itself was considered adulterous. And male or female adultery was wrong. So you didn't marry and remarry and marry and remarry. It wasn't part of the deal. But the thing that did exist was this thing called levirate marriage, which says that if a woman marries a man and the man dies, because I can't be independent, I can't be an earner, I can't be a landowner, I can't have my own home, I can't get a job, I need a man to help take care of me. So instead of leaving me high and dry as a widow, his brother would take me as a wife. That was the law. We can see that in the story of Judah and Tamar, if you want to sort of dig into, really? It's in there, and the laws within Leviticus. And so the woman would have taken or been taken as a wife by the other brother. Now, if that brother dies and there's another brother, then he takes her as a wife. and so on and so on. And so it doesn't have that same sort of connotation of adultery. It's just the law. It's how we cared for the women. And there's the part where if you have one husband who dies, life kind of happens, right? You have two husbands who die, that's a little bit iffy. Three husbands who die, there's a problem with you. Right? I mean, that judgment is still there. That question would be there for us as it would be in the first century. So even though it's probably not all of that maliciousness that we thought it was, it's still not great. And she still could have been marginalized from her community and set apart and different in those ways. So that's really the tradition that most of us have heard, if we've heard this text at all. That's what we come to, is this woman is a problem in one way or the other. She's on the margins of her community. She avoids those interactions, and she comes to the well sort of lonely and desperate, and here is this Jesus who offers her with grace. Now, Jesus is that person, but maybe the story is something wholly other than what we thought it was or what we've been told. Maybe we look at the historical evidence and we start to understand that actually women were part of synagogue leadership. In some of the ancient synagogues, above the threshold of the door, you can see the names of who was it was their synagogue. They had leadership. They had authority. And women were among those who were named. Not always, not everywhere, but indeed sometimes. And women in other places were known as the deacons. They were part of the leadership. In other places, they were part of the teaching team, basically, that women had at least 3 different ways that they were leaders within the synagogues, respected and understood and welcomed by their community. So what if this woman was actually one of those women? What if she wasn't a woman of ill repute? What if she wasn't a woman on the margins, but she was actually a woman who was central to the faith tradition of her town? And then she has this encounter with Jesus, and he says some things, and she's like, wait a minute. And so she pushes on those things, tests him, evaluates it. Well, what about this? You aren't just throwing words around, but are you actually speaking truth? Do you actually have some divine guidance, or are you just talking? Right? So she's testing him. She's having this conversation, this dialogue with him, and he's in turn having that dialogue with her. Now, one of the things that we see within this text that also sort of supports this notion is that after she has this encounter with Jesus, after they have this conversation, she's convinced. This man is special, and he's not just special as a teacher. He's not just special as a prophet. This man is the Messiah as he says he is. And what does she do? She runs to town and tells them all, come and meet a man. Now, if she was this marginalized, outcast woman that nobody even wanted to be associated with, and she comes to town and says, y'all have to go talk to this guy, what are y'all going to say? No, we don't listen to her, right? We don't follow her. We don't do what she says. But if a woman from your faith tradition, the leader in the synagogue, the woman who helps you understand your scriptures, your rituals, who you are as a person of faith, comes and says, you guys, I met this man and he was able to pass the test. I asked him these questions and he understood. He got it. He's something special. You have to come and see. Then what? You go. The people went. They followed her. That's what we see in the text. So maybe this woman isn't who we thought she was. Now, one way or the other, what we know is that her encounter with Jesus was something striking, something significant, something life-changing, where she, as a Samaritan in this separate sort of cousin group, was willing to say, I want to follow this man, Jesus. You have to know this Jew. No longer an enemy, no longer an other, but someone we should know, someone we should talk to, someone we should hear from. And so she calls her people to come and meet this man. So there's this whole other sermon that we're not going to have today about the assumptions that we make. How we hear just a few bits of information and think we know the whole story. We can just fill in the gaps ourselves. That's a story for another day. But today, what I want us to see is the power of this woman's testimony, for the ways that she proclaimed the good news of who Jesus was, the truth of who he was as the Messiah, and it spoke to people. If we're going to have a conversation about discipleship, about what it means to follow Jesus, first we have to have the conversation about what it means to meet Jesus? How do we come to know Jesus in the first place? How do we have that encounter at all? And so in that, there becomes a responsibility for each of us to do some self-reflection so that we can answer that question. Who is Jesus for you? What difference has Jesus made in your life? Can you answer that question? Readily? Easily? Are you ready to share the answer? If I asked you to turn to your neighbor and tell a story of how Jesus has made a difference in your life, would you be good to go, or would you need to go to the bathroom in about 2 seconds? Right? This isn't how we practice our faith. As Methodists, we're much more reserved than that. And there's this whole cultural war about, well, if I share Jesus, am I trying to tell you this, that, or the other thing? Am I condemning you to hell if I start this story? But I want us to sort of shelf that as best as we can and understand that talking about Jesus is sharing the good news of who he is and what he does. He offers us grace. He gives us hope. He offers discernment. There's forgiveness there. There's mercy there. There's justice there. There's compassion there. And I don't know about you, but I need some of that in my life. And when I look around at our very broken world, I think our world needs a bit of that too. We need to know that division and argument and hatred and judgment and war and disease and famine and taking just over the earth without respecting the earth is not the way to go. I think we need to know that it's not just not the way to go, but that there's another possibility. A possibility that has care for one another and for the creation on which we live. A possibility that has hope in times of trial. A possibility where when we're bound up by addiction, there's a possibility, a chance, a hope, a true hope that things can be changed and we can move forward. That where there's brokenness in our relationships, true hurt, deep hurt, that there can be healing and reconciliation and a way forward. To me, that's the good news of the gospel, and I think we need more of that. Each of us, whoever we are, has a pocket of need, or 10 or 12 or 250, the number doesn't matter, but we need the good news. And to receive the good news, we have to hear the good news, and to hear the good news, somebody has to proclaim the good news. And guess who the proclaimers are? Us. That's our job. So my challenge to you as we go into this week is to do that self-reflection. Who is Jesus to me? What difference does he make in my life? Does he make a difference in my life? Ask that question. Does he matter at all? And if you're looking, if you're searching, if you're reflecting and you're finding some answers, yes, he makes a difference in this way or that way or this way, then I want you to practice telling that story. Maybe you write it down first or you type it up. Maybe you draw it. Maybe you create it. Maybe you talk to a child or a spouse or a friend or a neighbor. But I want us to practice telling the good news of Jesus. Why? Because the world needs our good news, Mace. The world needs to know that there is love and grace and goodness better than the sin and brokenness that we are so good at offering and creating and doing. And if the world needs the good news and we have good news to offer, then guess what? That's our job, is to make those connections. Let us pray. Holy One, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who offers us so much. We ask that you would draw us near to him, that we would see him, that we would recognize him, that we would hear his truth, that we would receive his good gifts. We ask, God, that you would help us to see your hand at work in our lives. Anywhere and everywhere that you have been guiding, directing, giving wisdom, healing, discernment, truth, hope, healing. And that we would be willing to share those stories, recognizing that the world needs your good news. Help us to make those connections and to be a light in this world. Through Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.